So, joining me today from Mountain View, California, at one of Google's offices is Stephen Muller. Stephen, welcome to Beyond the Uniform. So, for listeners, I wanted to give an abbreviated background on you before we dive in. Stephen's over at Google. He works as their global strategic business development for Google Play. He started out at the Naval Academy as part of the finest class to walk the streets of Annapolis, class of 2002, after which he served in the Navy for 4 years with the Submarine Force as part of the USS West Virginia. After he transitioned out of the Navy, he worked for 5 years in the finance industry, first at Barclays Capital as their associate director, head of derivative client valuations for North America, and then at Deutsche Bank as a vice president. He then transitioned to Google, where he was a finance manager for 4 years before his current role. Stephen holds an MBA from the Duke Fuqua School of Business and a master's degree of engineering management from Old Dominion University. So, Stephen, maybe just to start things off, anything to add to that background or correct? Awesome. Well, I want to kind of talk about how you ended up where you're at, but let's maybe just start with where you're at right now. How would you describe to another veteran what you do at Google? Well, I always like one thing I always like to ask about is kind of what's the day to day look like? If I imagine every day is different, but if you had like a typical day, what time are you getting in? What sort of activities are you doing? How many people you're working with? Just to give it a little bit more vivid description. And I always ask kind of the lifestyle component, especially around like work on weekends and travel. But I'm particularly interested. I know a lot of people admire Google, and they kind of set the gold standard for the way in which they treat employees. So what's the lifestyle angle look like? I'm trying to remember that phrase. It's like happy cows produce good milk, and I'm like, I just think that's probably a shift generationally of this model of like you have to force people to work well and block Facebook from their computers versus the more contemporary, which is like, man, just make people happy and make them productive, and everyone wins. Well, one of the many reasons I was excited to connect is you have such an interesting story behind how you made it from the military into one of the most competitive companies in the world. And I know you've been sharing with a lot of people your story. So let's maybe back up to at what point did you know you were going to leave the military, and how did you approach that? So you went through the Lucas Group then? Okay. What was that? Just in case that's of interest to someone listening, like what did your work look like? What was your day-to-day life like doing derivatives? Yeah. Mm. And you were at Barclays for what, 2 years, 3 years? What led to that shift to Deutsche Bank? Oh man, you really were front row. At that point, were you thinking? Well, actually, let me back up. One other question. For that initial career path, how essential was an MBA? Would you recommend that to someone seeking to go into finance, or what's your thoughts on that? And then at this point, you're a vice president at Deutsche Bank. Very very high up position at a very well respected company. Are you thinking at this point, I'm taking this all the way? Like I'm into finance, or at this point, what are you starting to think about where you want to go? Yeah. No way. That is crazy, man. I just, in my mind, I've always assumed that you have to get some. I mean, I assume this in general, and then for Google, I assume you have to like marry into some to Google to get in. But the thought that you were able to go through the front door is incredible. Yeah. What did that day to day life look like when you first joined? Mm. And so at this point, you've uprooted your family from New York. You go cross country to California. You're at Google. You're in this finance role. What happens next? Mm. Mhm. And given how desirable of a workforce Google is, what advice do you have for a veteran who aspires to work there? Hmm. 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 Yeah. Hmm. What about how difficult was it to shift from finance manager into your role in business development? Mm-hmm. Mm. 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 I want to go into some like specific questions about kind of contrasting the military to civilian life. But anything else? What else would you like them to know about your journey since the military? Mm. Mm. What about having held leadership positions in the military and then in the world of finance and now at Google? How have you found that leadership differs outside of the military versus inside it? Mm-hmm. Mm. And I think of all the ways where my military background and the academy background has helped me succeed. I'm wondering the flip side though. Were there any habits you had to break coming from the military, or things that you realized like this worked in the military, but it's not going to help me out now in my new career? Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. I never put that together, but it is like it's true. Like there's kind of like or my experience with the military is it is kind of black or white, and it's incredible to build an organization of that size where you can distill things into kind of right or wrong, good or bad, black and white. And the amount of gray, it feels like, especially in startups, but I think in every job, it's just you live in that gray space and you live in that subtlety, and it's a lot more nuanced. So I think that's really interesting. Um, what about with I know this is very anecdotal, but I'm just wondering at Google, you must see a lot of other veterans there. And any thoughts on like what are common entry points? Like, are there people, are most people going to business school and then Google, or are they going to another job? Or what sort of trends do you see from your fellow veterans at Google? Man, that's good stuff. So I always like to keep the last chunk, just turn it over to you. And just knowing that you have a group of veterans and active duty listening or watching this, what would you like to share with them? It could be personal, it could be professional, but just any advice or words you want to share with them. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Stephen. I appreciate not just the advice you're sharing, but also the example of someone who is going after things and making big shifts from finance to Google and serving as that role model for the community of what's possible. And I also really appreciate the way that you make it accessible by all those parallels to the military. And I think you're being very humble because I agree that there's so many parallels where in essence it's the same as the military. And I know that the fraction of people who are able to get into the type of position you're at right now at Google, it's so few people. And so I appreciate the humility on it, but I just want to recognize that you are working at one of the most difficult organizations in the world to get into, and it's inspiring to see the example of someone who served their country and went on to continued greatness. So thank you for that. Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen.